Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of UCB on Mission. If you are a Christian, then you are following Jesus on his mission to love God and love neighbor. Now, my part of that mission looks different than your part of that mission, so UCB on Mission is a space where we can learn together about our work as a church family on the mission of God. As the Apostle Paul says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Now, you may know that we here at the United Church are unashamedly a Protestant church, and so I suspect that means you have heard about the solas of the Protestant Reformation. I'm talking soli Deo Gloria, solus Christus, sola fide, sola gratia, sola scriptura. Well, move over Martin Luther, John Calvin, and Zwingli. There's a new sola in town. I'm talking about sola po' boy. That's right. I want to make sure you know about our friends and sponsors over at Sola, bringing you an authentic New Orleans experience. You need to check them out. It is delicious. You'll find all the information down below this video to have an authentic Nolans experience. All right. With that, I would like to introduce our guest today. Today we are speaking with Dr. Luis Carlos Reyes, who is a professor of economics at the University of Javeriana, and he is the co-founder of the Observatorio Fiscal. Hey, Luis Carlos, you are on the screen. Thanks for joining us today for UCB on Mission.
Hi, thank you for inviting.
Yeah, it's great to see you. And I dig your scarf.
Thank you. Just a little plug for Isabella Dishington Designs. Get yours for an unspecified amount of money.
There you go.
Yep.
That's it. All right. Sorry, you didn't have like a Reformation zinger for us tied up with the scarf advert. That's okay. All right. So a lot of people know you already. We got some folks checking in on the chat already. Hey, Gloria and the Youngs, Moises and Laura, good to see you. We've got Hector and Olga from Florida. Good to see you all. And hey, Victoria. Why don't you introduce yourself and let folks know who you are?
Well, yeah, I mean, some of you know me. My name is Luis Carlos Reyes, any variation on that. I'm from here, this is very part of Bogota, but I've lived in several places. When I was 15, my family moved to Mexico. Then when I was 18, we moved to the States, where I studied, became an adult, went to grad school, completed my PhD, was a professor there, worked for the federal government of the United States in Washington, D.C. But I had always felt a drive in my heart to come back to Colombia and see how I could contribute to issues relating to economic development here. Economic development was sort of the core of what I studied through all of my time in school, and applying that here in Colombia was something I had always wanted to do. And so at some point, I decided to come back, and here I am. I've been in Bogota for the last 6 years, and it's been great. I've enjoyed it immensely, and through basically all of that time, I've also been a member of United Church.
Good, and you should tell us a little bit about your family too.
Right. So I'm married to Isabella Dishington, recently married. So we met at United Church, and we are expecting a baby boy. Yeah, we're very happy to be a family.
That's awesome. We're all looking forward to meeting little Adam Smith, Reyes Dishington, very, very soon. All right. So you've previously said that economists are the greatest people in the world. I was wondering if you could elaborate for our audience. I'm just kidding. You don't need to go into detail, though you may believe that.
I mean, not necessarily, but yeah.
Um,
Right.
most of the time we have a PhD on, it's folks would just kind of look cross-eyed at their screen if I said, "Tell us about your dissertation." But your dissertation was actually had a lot to do with Colombia. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So when so I grew up in Colombia in the 1990s, and back then the problem of drug trafficking was worse in some respects than it was now. Cocaine production was roughly the same than it is currently, but back then violence fueled by the drug traffic was uh, very, very bad. And so that was one of the things that I guess drove me towards studying about what caused things like these, right? What would cause like all these social phenomena. And so when I was in grad school, I focused on a branch of economics that's called development economics. It has a lot to do with how people in very rural communities live, what challenges they face, how they make the decisions that they choose to make. And I just remember being in class and reading these papers that honestly didn't find very interesting about farmers who grew rice in Indonesia. I wanted to do something centered in Colombia, and I started thinking, do we have any crop that has like an interesting social dynamic attached to it? And that's one of those questions that once you ask it, the answer is obvious. The production of coca in Colombia um, had effects that went beyond what happened to those farmers. And so I started studying that. Specifically, I started looking at whether coca eradication, like spraying of coca crops, had any of the effects that policymakers intended it to have, namely to reduce the amount of coca that is grown in the country. And so uh, the challenge there. So economists, and especially applied microeconomist, which is like the sub branch of economics that my expertise is sort of all out. We're very concerned with differentiating between correlation and causation, right? A lot of things are correlated, and when variable x causes variable y, x and y are also usually correlated, but one does not mean the other. For instance, there's a classic problem where if you see in a city more police officers, you see more crime. Does that mean that police officers cause crime? Well, it could, but not necessarily. And so like a lot of social problems and economic problems have like all these all these unknowns there, right? Like all these things are correlated, but does that mean that one causes the other? We don't know unless we conduct a very careful econometric study. And so my dissertation was about trying to understand whether the spraying of coca crops had the intended effect on the cultivation of coca crops, right? By spraying coca crops, do we reduce the total amount of land that is devoted to that? And so, after 5 years of studying that, the answer, I'm pleased to tell you, or not pleased, but at least now I'm pretty certain that the answer is no. It does not. It does not seem to be helping to reduce the crops of coca that we have in Colombia, and so that that leads to a lot of policy recommendations, right? Even if you wanted to have uh, a strong, very strict policy, spraying coca crops just literally doesn't seem to do what it's intended to do. Even if you say you didn't care about the farmers who grow coca, maybe you don't care about their well-being, you just want to get rid of the coca. Spraying these crops is just not doing any good. They get replaced so quickly by other coca plantations that the net effect is just you're just wasting a lot of money and not reducing in any meaningful way the amount of coca that is available to produce cocaine and ultimately export that into consumer countries. So so yeah, that's what my dissertation was about. I've been that was a while ago. I graduated 10 years ago from the PhD program at Michigan State, and so I've been looking into other things, but mostly uh, everything I've done has been centered around studying and understanding the institutional characteristics of the Colombian economy, right? Um, there are things like you have in the U.S. I don't know, like Social Security, right? It has uh, like a lot of very specific details that people have studied, um, in extreme and sometimes boring detail as well. But in Colombia, even though we have like pretty good studies out very many things, the depth of what has been done and how well academic economists like me know like the tiny little details of, say, the I don't know, the budget process or the tax system is it's a lot less deep. It's more shallow than what your average academic economist knows about the way the institutions work in the U.S. And in Colombia, this is knowledge that seems to be uh, held more tightly by policymakers and maybe the lawyers who are in government. So a lot of what I have been doing is just trying to apply those tools that that I learned in my studies to some pressing policy questions here in Colombia, and then currently I'm working on uh, public economics, right? Which is so my research is at the intersection of development and public economics. So how do we understand taxation and spending in the context of a country that is also a developing country, right? So yeah, that's what I've been doing for the past several years.
Excellent. We're going to get into that, into the weeds even a little. But we need to back up first. Ambassador Goldberg is on the live chat here, and he just did a scratchy face emoji. So thanks for your policy recommendations. I'm just kidding. He's not on. But yeah, that's fascinating. And I'm sure, yeah, we do have folks that listen to recommendations like that. So it's good information to have. It's nice to not waste money, right? Especially taxpayer money,
Yep.
which does relate to what we're going to talk about. But before we go any further, let's just talk about what an economist is. And for that, I'm going to bring in my favorite segment, Questions from a Kid.
It's time for Questions from a Kid.
All right, we've got Fox here. Hey, Fox, how you doing today?
Hi.
Hi, Fox.
I'm doing okay.
Doing okay, good. We've got an economist here, Luis Carlos. And Fox, you have some questions for Luis Carlos. What's your first question?
What is an economist?
Well, an economist is a kind of scientist, right? An economist is a scientist that studies the way people make decisions that cost them money, right? So this is like a lot of things. This is not so. Decisions that cost you money are decisions like if you buy candy, you have less money, right? That's one type of decision. But there are also decisions that cost you money, even if you're not spending that money. And economists study that as well. So if you choose to have a job that you really like that pays less money than a job that you don't like as much, that's also a decision that costs you money. And it's also something that an economist analyzes, right? If you choose to, and hopefully you won't, and no one will, if you choose to commit a crime, that's also a decision that has a cost, right? You may pay a fine, you may go to prison, and you may forgo income. Also, you will have a terrible time. That's also one of the things that economists study. So economists study people. This is or at least some of the decisions that people make. And And so what we do is very, very broad. But yeah, I guess if I had to, try to narrow down to a simple definition, it would be an economist studies the decisions that people make that cost them money.
So if you wanted to, say, choose between becoming a baseball player
Mhm.
or robbing a bank, an economist like Luis Carlos would say the best decision is probably to become a baseball player. Yeah?
Exactly.
Right. All right. What's your next question, Fox?
I don't believe even there's a job to rob a bank.
Oh, there are people who make a living out of robbing banks, but they don't do it like they do in the movies anymore, really.
Hmm.
So now you can rob a bank from your computer. What? All right.
Just like they robbed your credit card?
Exactly. Yeah. But anyways, Fox, what's your second question?
My second question is, why did you decide to become an economist?
Well, I cared a lot about two things that economists study, and those two things are poverty and inequality. So being an economist is a way to thinking out the way that we can get people out of poverty and reduce income inequality. Moving towards a society where everyone has more equal opportunities and therefore ends up having roughly the same amount of money to spend on their children's education, on their health, on the food they eat, and so on. So that's why.
Cool.
Cool.
Other question?
How do you want to help people as an economist?
Well, so I'm an economics professor, and so I hope that I will be able to help in at least two ways. One is by teaching my students, and the other is by doing research that answers questions about how can we help people get out of poverty and how we can create a more equal society.
Cool. So sometimes Luis Carlos goes on the news and tells people on the news about decisions and research. That's pretty cool, right?
Yeah. Wow. I thought people I didn't know went on the news.
No, you know some people that have been on the news.
Really?
Yeah, really?
Oh yeah, I forgot. I know Wiley.
Yeah, Wiley's been on the news. All right, buddy. Anything else from you?
No.
Did you learn a little bit about what an economist is?
Mm-hmm.
Good work. All right, thanks, buddy. Close my door on your way out. And that was questions from a kid. Okay, so we could talk about a lot of things. I'm really interested in your work with the Observatorio Fiscal. I doubt you just woke up one day and said, I'm gonna start this thing and I'm gonna see where it goes. There's probably a story that has led to your co-founding the Observatorio Fiscal. Can you tell us a little bit of that story and what inspired you to start this?
Sure. So actually, one time they called me to be on the news talking about tax reform, and I said no because even though as an economist, I know what's known as optimal tax theory, which is how, in principle, you would design a tax system. That's not the kind of thing that they want you to talk when they're discussing tax reform. They want you to talk about the specifics of, what does the Colombian tax system look like, and if we make this change, what will happen to it? So I have not studied the Colombian tax system in depth. And so I said no, and I mentioned this to a colleague who said, well, we're having a series of regular meetings with other professors from several universities, and we're deciding tax reform. So why don't you come and help us, and you will learn as you go? And I thought that was a great idea because that had always been on my to-do list. So when so we were looking at both, the how much money the government received from each tax, and how much the government was spending on various social programs. And I was assigned, a task, and I started doing what everyone would do in this situation, which was Googling it. I wanted to know how much money the Colombian government was getting from the corporate income tax or from the VAT that we pay when we shop. And it was very hard to find this information. I actually didn't find it. And I remembered very distinctly when I was teaching in the US at Grand Valley State University in Grand Rapids, Michigan, how I had been able to obtain this information really easily. There was, and you can still find it, it's like a budget deficit puzzle from the New York Times. And you can print it out, and it's like a puzzle, right? And it shows you how much the federal government receives from various sources of income and how much it spends on all the stuff that it buys. And you can sort of play around with which programs you would cut, which taxes you would increase. And when I was teaching at Grand Valley, one time I actually, was a little bored of the routine. So I just, and there was, some of you may remember back in, I don't know, 2010, 11, there was this, I believe it was called the Super Committee. So a number of senators, 8 of them, were trying to come. So 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, they were trying to come to an agreement on how to reduce the budget deficit in the U.S. And so the Times printed this, or created this puzzle for people to figure out how they would fix the government's finances. And so I gave this activity to my students. I split them into groups of 8, like the 8 senators that were discussing this, and everyone had a blast. It was fascinating that all the groups of 8 students that I formed were able to fix the country really easily. And so it was not that that there were differences that were intractable, at least between regular people. And so it was a lot of fun. So several years later, I was, with my colleagues trying to just figure out how much money the Colombian government was taking in, how much it was spending on different issues, and I couldn't find this information. I started looking for, well, I immediately looked for this puzzle in the New York Times, and I looked at the sources of the information, and there were a couple of organizations that had contributed to this puzzle. One of them was called is called the Tax Policy Center, and the other is the Center on Budget Policies and Priorities, on Budget Policy and Priorities. And I realized that we had nothing like it in Colombia. These 2 organizations in the U.S., they are sort of civil society watchdogs that try to give the public the same sort of information that the Congressional Budget Office gives congresspeople in the U.S., or that the Office of Management and Budget gives the President of the United States. That they try to give citizens the same information. So I was very surprised to realize that not only did we not have these watchdog organizations in Colombia, also Congress had nothing like the Congressional Budget Office. So I realized it would be great to have one of these organizations in Colombia, and I started telling everyone who would listen about this, and a lot of people thought it was a good idea. And at some point, the right person thought it was a good idea. The right person in this case was the president of the university, who decided to fund this initiative. And so here we are. Maybe 4 years after I realized that there was a need for this.
So what you just described on your website, which by the way is below this video if you want to check out the Observatorio Fiscal, you describe this as the democratization of spending information. And I wonder if you could just tell us, why is it important that citizens have this information?
Well, I'm very thankful that we live in a democracy. It's imperfect like all democracies, but ultimately citizens can decide how their taxes are allocated through their vote. But if they don't have the information on what's actually going on with their money, then politicians can tell them pretty much like everything that they want to hear, and they will not vote in a way that will lead to change. In so and then even in countries that have good information, people make strange voting decisions. But there were a number of things that really bothered me. So politicians, and this was common in the previous presidential election, would claim things like Colombia is the country in the world where you pay the most taxes, right? We can always argue about whether we should pay more taxes or less taxes, right? That's always a valid discussion, but that's just false, right? As a percentage of GDP, Colombia pays a lot less than the average OECD country, a lot less than the US, even a lot less than the average Latin American country. So, and yet politicians could run and actually win elections by claiming that they were going to reduce taxes because we were paying too much. Or they could claim that spending was, out of control, when in reality, if we want to fund education for the children of this country so that they will have the same opportunities that well-off people have, we desperately need a larger budget. If we want a better healthcare system, like even if there were no corruption and no inefficient public spending, we would need more money. But when you don't have an objective organization giving this information to citizens and to journalists, then people can't make informed voting decisions. So democratizing information about public spending, we think, is crucial to enable citizens to make better voting decisions. And so that's why we're doing what we do. We're hoping to create a more democratic culture, not just on paper, but in practice in Colombia. I think it's no coincidence that the rallying cry of the American Revolution was no taxation without representation.
Right.
And when you don't even know what the money is being spent on, and you don't know how much you're being taxed on various things, it's you can't even start to sort of rethink the society that you live in.
I just had this visual of going and dumping over vats of Juan Valdez coffee, just because we,
Right.
I'm guessing that would be the equivalent here of our Tea Party.
Yep.
Well, actually, there's a bigger building that you could probably knock over right down the street from us. So, all right, you've said we want this information in the hands of the voters because now voters know more. We keep our politicians honest. Is it as simple as all of our spending decisions used to be made in a room of 10 people, and nobody was allowed in there or to see the meetings, the minutes of the meetings for the spending decisions, and now you have invited yourself into the room to be able to report to Congress, to be able to report to the voting public. I mean, is that a fair way to describe what you're up to?
I mean, it's a little bit like it. So I've been surprised. So when we started, I actually thought that Congress knew what the money was being spent on. So initially, what we were doing was entirely aimed at informing citizens, and in particular at informing journalists, right? Because we assumed that Congress people are very powerful, so they must have access to all the information about how the money is being spent. We know in the U.S. that people in Congress, especially those in the economic policymaking committees, they have a good grasp on the country's finances. So one of the most surprising things, less than a year after we got started, was having members of Congress, both from the Senate and the House of Representatives, come to my office and ask, do you know what the money is being spent on? We also have no idea. And it seems that there's a few powerful members of Congress that meet in closed door meetings with the Minister of Finance, and they are the ones who decide how the money is spent, right? There is, of course, a public budget. What happens is, and this is like this may sound tremendously boring, but it's a very fruitful exercise, right? Go and look for the, uh, the appropriations bill in the United States, and look at the detail in which spending will be described. And you will see things like, well, the IRS for this year needs to start this new program, and we will hire, a tax lawyer. We will hire some janitorial staff. I mean, it doesn't go like all the way down to we will buy a coffee maker to keep all these people awake while thinking out taxes, but it gets close to that. By contrast, if you look at the DIAN, so like the Colombian tax agency line item in the Colombian budget, it's just we will spend this many trillion pesos in tax in a tax agency, and that's it. That's the end of it, right? So unless you go to these closed door meetings with the Minister of Finance, you may well be a member of Congress, but you still don't have a good idea of how the money is spent. Furthermore, these so unfortunately, the members of Congress who go to these meetings, usually their intention seems not to be to make sure that the money is going to good ends, to fruitful goals. They just want to secure a piece of it for themselves or for their political clients. So they don't need to know how all the money is being spent. They just need to know that their share is secure, and they content themselves with that. So what we found is actually only a handful of people at the Ministry of Finance really know what's happening with the money. So that's way worse than we expected, somewhat naively at the beginning. But now we have definitely been able to raise a lot of questions in the minds of first citizens who, I mean, looking into the budget is kind of boring, right? So you just assume that there are smart people taking care of it, and that people who have political incentives to sort of denounce any irregularities. And that was not happening. So I think we have been able to raise a decent amount of awareness, especially amongst the media, and we're hopeful that we will get more detailed budgets and more of an effort from the Ministry of Finance in explaining to the people how their money is spent. But we still have a long way to go.
We could play a game, a new segment called Correlation versus Causation. And I could give you two things like transparency and corruption, and you could tell me if these are correlated or causal. What is your take? Maybe you don't have enough information here to be able to say, but in general, as you see this happening in other parts of the world, what's the relationship between transparency and corruption?
That's a great question. I think there are countries that are fairly transparent with their finances, and there's still corruption, right? I think maybe transparency is what you could also call a necessary but not sufficient condition for, for like an appropriate handling of government finance and for getting a country to grow economically. Because I struggle to think of countries that are both like decent, decent economic performers, that have little corruption and that are also not very transparent. I can give you a couple of examples of countries that have great budgetary transparency. Um, like Mexico is fairly good. They still have plenty of issues. So yeah, it's a transparency matters. It's not all you need, but I do think it may come in a package, right? It may come in a package of uh, a more democratic culture. Democracy is not just written down in a constitution. It's also a series of attitudes and convictions that a national community holds more or less universally, right? If you believe that you have a right to certain things and you act on that belief, that tends to be a self that can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you think, on the other hand, that the government is corrupt and there's nothing you can do about it, and then you do nothing about it, then it also can be self-fulfilling. So I think we're not only pushing for transparency, but we're also pushing for people to value transparency, because this is a value um, that I think can only strengthen democracy.
Yeah, that's great. Um, I mean, the first time you told me about this year and a half, 2 years ago, I was shocked to hear the scenario that you just described. And yeah, if I'm going to put you in office as a voter to spend my tax money this way, and you get in office, and I have no idea how you're spending my tax money, I'm what? How is that democratic? How is there an adequate feedback uh, for someone like me? Whereas if I know how you're spending my tax money and it matches what you said you were going to do, then great, I can reelect you, or I can vote you out and put somebody else in who's going to do what they told the voters they were going to do. And we're missing a pretty significant step if we had no idea, the public had no idea how our tax money is being spent. Um, so this is really cool work. Um, have you made some people mad about this?
Yes.
Don't name any names, please.
uh, yeah. Well, the definitely the Ministry of Finance seems uh, to think we're a little bit of a pain, and that's great. We recently uh, received something like in the States there's the Freedom of Information Act, that allows you to request information that ought to be public from the government, and you have to get a response. There's something similar in Colombia that's called Derecho de Petición. And so this is usually a tool that citizens use to get information from the government. Recently, someone, actually a couple of times, one time a very powerful senator who I will not name, and recently a government office sent us derechos de petición, which is very weird, because like this is something that you send to someone who is in a position to intimidate you, right? So it can be filed, not just with the government, but also with organizations, private organizations, and even individuals. But the way the law is written, this is for people who have some sort of sway over you. So it was peculiar to receive these things from powerful people and institutions like that. And so, yeah, I think some people don't appreciate that we've sort of implied that they're not being transparent or forthcoming with the information. Yeah.
Makes sense. It seems like that's an indication that you're doing your job correctly. Talk Thomas asked, do you think that the Fiscalia is operating to control corruption? Do you see the Fiscalia taking steps to control corruption? Or
I'm sure there's very valuable work being done at the Fiscalía, as well as some of the other, they're called entes de control, right? The Procuraduría, Contraloría. I think the work that they do is very valuable. It's also very different from what we're doing. I get the sense that the idea, so when Colombians think about corruption, we tend to picture a small town mayor spending the money that they get from the central government on, something like a mariachi band, right? For the local, for the town festivities. Or we tend to think of corruption as like the little people mishandling the money. What we're finding is that the really, really big people, the ones who handle trillions of pesos, are not giving a clear, detailed breakdown of what they're spending the money on, and they're just telling us, trust us, and let's go chase those little people who are misusing those funds. And I have no doubt that the small town bureaucrats may mishandle the money, but when we're talking about trillions of pesos that we're not sure what they're being allocated to, I think that's a problem, right? And none of these entes de control was looking at that. They were just assuming that the Ministry of Finance was handling the money correctly, and we just had to go after people who mishandled the money that they received from them. So yeah, that would be my answer.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that question, Thomas. All right, so this is UCB on mission. We've already reached the point where we're not just talking about political ideals, preferences. We are talking about ethics. And so tell us how you, as an economist, are on the mission of God. You're a Christian, and you have a PhD in economics, and you're doing work in tax reform. And how is this a part of God's mission?
Well, throughout the Bible, and in particular in the Old Testament, there's this very profound sense that justice is and economic justice, right, is very close to God's heart. So, for instance, in the Old Testament, we have very, very strict commandments to make sure that essentially land is distributed in an equal fashion, right? In an ancient society like Israel, land was the capital that was there, right? Land was wealth, and you essentially had massive wealth redistribution every 40 years with the Jubilee. You had very clear admonitions to respect the boundaries of private property that were set, when the land was originally distributed amongst the people of Israel. You had very clear admonitions that the Lord hates of false weights and measures, which sounds odd. But when you think of something like Colombian society today, or indeed developing economies throughout the world, you see that there is this tremendous inequality that can be traced to inequality of wealth, inequality of opportunity, to powerful people violating the rights, including the private property rights of the poor. And so God didn't command the Israelites to wait until they died and went to heaven and things were just fixed. He wanted a society that reflected his principles here and now. And there's nothing about the New Testament that should make us think that now we don't have to care about these principles of economic equality and justice. And working towards making that a reality is, I think it's pretty cool, right? Thinking of bringing society closer to the freedom of the children of God, as Paul describes it in Romans 8. I think one of the coolest reflections about the Bible in its entirety that I've read is how everything starts in Genesis with humanity in a garden, right? And this garden is, nature as God created it. And then, things start to go wrong, and God rescues us at a tremendous cost. But then when you go all the way to Revelation 21, when things are once again completely under, God's, when everyone is obeying God's will, you don't get a return to the exact situation that you had at the beginning, right? At the beginning, you had humanity in a garden. Now you have humanity living in the New Jerusalem, which is a city, right? Cities appear in the Bible. Actually, the first city was founded by the descendants of Cain, right? They seem to be this thing that just sort of distorted God's designs, right? You get to Babel, and that's also civilization. So cities and civilization, they go hand in hand, right? You get civilization as apparently a distortion of what God intended originally. But then when you get this final restoration of all things, you get a city that is a holy city, right? So you have something that is completely the byproduct of human of the human mind, of human society, of human interaction, which is civilization. Now being sort of incorporated into the new creation that God will bring into being, right? So this is all to say that we, in the way that we organize ourselves in our civilizations, in our social relations, you get the sense from the Bible that a lot of the things that we're doing in society here and now may end up being eternal. They may end up having eternal consequences. It's a mystery to think of exactly how, right? So I don't know if thinking of tax reform for any country is something that will have consequences in the new creation, but I do believe that all these byproducts of human reflection, of human interaction, will last even beyond the present state of creation. How exactly, it's a mystery, like the resurrection itself. But I believe that thinking all these things and trying to create more just, more equitable societies is not just something that we do while, as N.T. Wright often says, we're not doing this while we're in the waiting room for heaven. What we do here and now in our relations with others has eternal consequences. And so that's one way, I think, in which not just economists, but maybe social scientists and politicians and people who think about how society is organized are working towards something that will last, and that God will redeem and purify and incorporate into His new creation. So yeah.
I love that. I mean, that's the point of this show, is I want people to be thinking this way about the heavenly good of earthly work, how my vocation is, in a sense, rehearsing eternity. What is it that's redeemable about the world? How can I make a difference and take us there? And it's fun for me to think. I suspect I'm going to have to go through some sort of retraining program on the new earth, because you don't really need pastors anymore. Maybe I have a role, like, I don't know, maybe I get to help in the worship services or something. But because we are going to, we're coming from a garden and going to, the city, the New Jerusalem is very, it's trying to make a bad joke here. It's a very, it's not your garden variety city. It's this weird mixture of what a garden looks like when it's been cultivated and restored. It's full of civilization and culture and beauty and humanity. And, we're going to need people like you and like many of the guests we've had on UCB. I'm not so sure that you need me anymore. I'm not so sure you need an epidemiologist anymore. So we're going to have to go through some retooling. In my second career, I've told you, it would be in economics, just because I find it a lot of fun. So yes, I'm with you. It's super fun to think about the heavenly good of earthly work and rehearsing eternity together. I mean, it sounds like, as I read the Old Testament, we had these brilliant laws that were designed for human flourishing. And some of them were in response to brokenness, but some of them were designed for human flourishing and equality. And we could have used some sort of Hebrew version of an Observatorio Fiscal in the Old Testament, because people came into power and turned their hearts away from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and did what was right in their own eyes. And then things went poorly, right? I don't know. That I've not thought about that. How we need an Old Testament watchdog group.
I think to me it's so I find this verse to reflect very well a little of what we try to do, right? The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate ways find favor with him, right? So when I read something like this, I imagine people in the market being cheated, being sold less meat or less grain than the scale, than a true scale would say, right? But I think it's the same sort of sin, right? When the government tells you that they're spending this much money on this program and they're actually not, but they're still getting your vote. I think it's the same sort of sin that the Lord detests. So yeah.
Yeah, and the people who suffer when there's no transparency, when people get into office and do the opposite of what they said they were going to do, or typically, I mean, I heard you allude to this earlier, but it's the poor. If you ignore the Jubilee rule, well, who gets boxed out? It's the poor who don't have anything, and the people who have something continue to have it more and more and more at the expense of their brothers and sisters. We could talk for a long time. Oh wow, we've gone way longer than I'm supposed to. My apologies, listeners and viewers. Dream with me, if you will, or dream with our viewers, the impact that you would love to see on Colombia through the Observatorio Fiscal. What would it look like in 10 years if you're successful?
Well, I think I have modest dreams. I would love to see economic journalists, being able to report accurately on how much was spent on each program. And I would love our tax reforms, of which we have one every other year, to never be undertaken without having a widespread discussion of how this impacts income inequality. I was very pleased that I felt we really played a role in having at least this discussion being widespread in the previous tax reform. I noticed that the word progressive, in the sense of a progressive tax, sort of entered the vocabulary of people in the media and politicians, even though it had not before this tax reform. And I'm pretty sure it was us who started educating the public on what a progressive tax is and why it is important in Colombia. It's important, amongst other things, because the Constitution says the tax system should be progressive, right? That's not just a policy preference. So that was really cool. I think I think 10 years from now, it would be great to know that the organization that I lead is strong and stable, and it doesn't depend on me being there anymore. So this takes two things, right? It requires funding. I would like to raise an endowment so that we don't have to do consulting. There's a lot of very professional consulting firms. I hesitate to call them think tanks in Colombia, because they make all of their money by doing consulting. And the people who will pay for consulting, for economic consulting on fiscal policy issues in Colombia, are the government, and also big lobbying groups for the oligopolies that sort of run the Colombian economy. So they can't take a chance and say anything that's too controversial, or they will risk their two lone sources of income. So I would love to be able to raise an endowment to ensure that what we're doing endures. And also, I would like to have the people who are currently working there sort of transmit their knowledge to new people, so that more than this being just a group of all 9 of us that we currently have in the team, knowing exactly what it is that we have to do, I would hope that this would be an institutional culture that is transmitted to a new cohort of recruits. And so 10 years from now, what I would most love to see is for the Observatorio Fiscal to continue doing what it's doing, but only better and more sustainably, and hopefully without me heading it.
Great. That's awesome. How could your average viewer be involved with this work? How would you direct them to read, or the conversations they're having? What would you say to them?
Well, certainly they can visit our website, which is on the link. I would encourage them to reach out to us with any questions. If they can donate, we have a bright orange donate button on our website, and we would very much appreciate this. This serves two purposes, right? Of course, the funds themselves are useful, but we also want to be able to show Colombian society at large that citizen-led initiatives that do not depend on these big, powerful lobbying groups or the government can have a continued impact on public opinion. So yeah. Any of those would be a great way to sort of contribute. Stay informed, talk to us, donate if you can. That would be great.
And of course, if you donate, then you receive an annual report of how every penny was spent, right, from you guys?
Naturally.
Yeah. Okay. All right. How would you ask someone to pray for you before they close this video?
Well, I would appreciate prayers for God's protection and God's vision for what's next. And Yeah, I think when we pray for the leaders in our country, that's crucial too, right? I would much rather them listen to what we're saying than us have to argue and confront them, even though that at times is, it's kind of exciting. But yeah, I think for open minds from our leaders, that would be the thing that we could use the most.
Great. Well, let me pray for you and your team as we finish. Lord, thanks for Luis Carlos. Thank you for Isabella. Thank you for this little one that you've given their family. I pray for them on a personal level that you would bless their new marriage and this new journey into parenthood. Lord, I pray that that this work, we see its we see your fingerprints all over it, because this is the sort of thing that you delight in, the sort of thing that leads to human flourishing in your world. It smells of eternity and fairness and justice. And so, Lord, I pray that that you would be in this, that you would advance Luis Carlos and his team in their ability to find information and to write clearly and to analyze. Lord, I pray for doors to be open to them, that this would grow, that in 10 years we would find ourselves in a more democratic country where information is available to anyone who would like to Google it, and it's actually a real reflection of reality. Lord, I pray that you would give them favor in the eyes and the ears of decision makers here in Colombia. And that as we pray for this country and we pray for its leaders, that they would be inspired by your sort of justice, Lord. We don't ask this because we want Colombia to be great apart from you. We ask this because we would love to see you exalted in and through Colombia, in and through our systems, as there is less and less waste and less corruption and less inequality, that those who are on the margins suffer no longer, but that they are taken care of the way that you long to see people on the margins taken care of. So give them wisdom, give them energy, give them the resources that they need to move this mission, your mission, forward, Lord, that it would be a blessing to all the families of Colombia. And I pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on, Luis Carlos. It was fascinating and fun, and I could do this for another hour, but that's a really long YouTube video if we do that.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was great.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to kick you off the screen, but stay on the line.
All right.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us for another episode of UCB on Mission. Now, tomorrow we've got worship at 11 a.m. as normal. And next week, you'll hear that we do not have a UCB on Mission. We're going to take a week break, but don't worry, we've got a great guest list coming up for you right after that. So nothing next week. The week after that, we will be back on. So remember, if you are a follower of Jesus, you are on mission. What will that mission look like for you this week? Let's talk about it soon. Take care.